This is Fobia. Not everything makes sense. Some stories don't end, and the most disturbing truth does not make a sound. Listen closely.
The radio room crackled with Amelia Earhart's final words. "We are on course. We'll repeat this message. Stand by." Her voice, strained but controlled, floats through the static, then disappears. The crew of the Coast Guard ship Itasca exchange glances. They adjust dials and press headphones tighter against their ears, straining to hear the promised follow-up. They are faced with a wall of silence. The captain orders black smoke released, a dark column rising hundreds of feet above the ship, a beacon for a pilot who never appears. Hours pass. By 10 a.m., the unspoken truth settles like a heavy stone. Whatever happened to Amelia Earhart has already happened. This is the story of Amelia Earhart's final moments before disappearing over the Pacific Ocean. Amelia Earhart didn't fit the mold of a typical woman in the 1920s. She cut her hair short, wore pants, drove fast cars, and flew airplanes when flying was still considered dangerous business, even for men. Born in Kansas in 1897, her path to becoming an aviation icon wasn't straightforward. She worked as a nurse during World War I, took her first airplane ride in 1920, and was immediately hooked. "As soon as we left the ground, I knew I had to fly," she wrote later. Flying lessons cost money Earhart didn't have, so she worked odd jobs, saved every dollar, and finally started training with female flight instructor Nita Snook. She bought her first plane in 1921, a bright yellow, small biplane she nicknamed the Canary. She could have remained just another aviation enthusiast, but in 1928, a phone call changed her life. Wealthy publisher George Putnam was looking for a woman to be the first female passenger on a transatlantic flight. Earhart accepted, and though she admitted she was just baggage on that trip, the publicity launched her to fame. Putnam recognized her star potential. Tall, slim, with tousled hair and a freckled face, she projected both competence and approachability. They married in 1931, though Earhart called it a partnership with dual control, keeping her independence and maiden name. Amelia's flying achievements started piling up. In 1932, she flew solo across the Atlantic, battling equipment failures and ice-covered wings before landing in an Irish field. She became the first woman to fly solo non-stop across the US. First person to fly solo from Hawaii to California. By 1937, Earhart wanted one last great adventure, one final record, flying around the world at its widest point, following the equator. Her first attempt ended in Hawaii with a damaged plane. Her second attempt with navigator Fred Noonan brought them 22,000 miles to Lae, New Guinea by late June. What remained was the most challenging stretch, 2,556 miles of open Pacific to a tiny island called Howland. The Lockheed Electra stood on the Lae airstrip, its silver skin reflecting the early morning light. Ground crews worked through the night, checking engines, topping off oil, and loading the final supplies. 1,100 gallons of fuel had been carefully measured and distributed among the plane's tanks. This would give Earhart and Noonan approximately 21 hours of flying time, just enough for the journey to Howland Island with a small reserve. July 2nd, 1937, dawned hot and clear in New Guinea. By 10 a.m., Earhart and Noonan had completed their final preparations. Their flight plan was straightforward, but a little daunting. A straight-line course, east-northeast to Howland Island, crossing the international dateline along the way. The tiny island measured less than 2 miles long and half a mile wide, a speck in the vast Pacific. A test to the limits of 1930s navigation. The weight of the fuel made takeoff challenging. Earhart taxied to the far end of the grass runway, turned into the wind, and pushed the throttles forward. The twin Wasp engines roared as the Electra accelerated slowly, fighting gravity and inertia. Just before reaching the runway's end, the plane lifted reluctantly into the air. Earhart banked slightly east and disappeared into the morning sky as a small crowd of officials and locals watched from the field. At 2:18 p.m, Harry Balfour at the Ley radio station received Earhart's first in-flight message. Height 7,000 feet, speed 140 knots, followed by words that sounded like, "Everything okay?" Balfour tried to maintain contact, sending weather reports until 5:20 p.m, but he received no response from Earhart. As darkness fell over the Pacific, Earhart and Noonan crossed into a world of stars and black water. With no visual references below, they relied on Noonan's celestial navigation. He would track the stars and planets, calculating their position by measuring the height of celestial bodies above the horizon. But the night brought challenges beyond navigation. Earhart had deliberately left certain equipment behind to make room for extra fuel, including a low-frequency radio direction finder that might have helped in locating Howland Island. Her remaining radio equipment operated on high frequencies, which work well during daylight, but can become unpredictable at night. Meanwhile, aboard the Coast Guard ship Itasca, stationed at Howland Island, radio operators prepared for their role in guiding Earhart to her destination. The ship would transmit signals for Earhart to home in on, while providing weather updates and confirming Earhart's position. The initial schedule called for contact at 2:45 a.m. local time on July 2nd, when Earhart would be roughly halfway to Howland. That hour came and went without a transmission from the Electra. The radio operators were not initially concerned. Radio silence during long overwater flights was not unusual, and Earhart might be conserving battery power. But as dawn approached with still no word, the first seeds of worry were planted. No one aboard the Itasca could have known that this silence is the first sign of something ominous. Tension mounted in the Itasca's radio room. Then, at 6:14 a.m, the silence finally broke. Earhart's voice came through the speakers. "We must be on you, but cannot see you." The transmission was brief and ended without acknowledging whether she had received any of the Itasca's broadcasts. The ship immediately responded, but there was no indication Earhart heard them. This one-way communication established the pattern that continued throughout the morning. Earhart could transmit to the Itasca, but apparently could not receive their replies. At 6:45 a.m, Earhart requested the Itasca to identify her location and announced she would whistle into her microphone to help locate her position through radio direction finding. The Itasca transmitted as requested, but the ship did not have the necessary equipment. It could not determine Amelia's position from her signals. This was a critical misunderstanding, a flaw in the flight's planning. The mood aboard the Itasca went dark with each passing transmission. At 7:42 a.m. came the message that shifted their concern into alarm. "We must be on you but cannot see you. Gas is running low. Been unable to reach you by radio. We are flying at 1,000 feet." This was a sign of serious trouble. The mention of fuel triggered sudden anxiety. Earhart's flight plan allowed little margin for error, and the longer she searches for the island, the quicker her fuel reserves are depleted. Flying at 1,000 feet meant that she was making visual sweeps, desperately trying to spot Howland Island below. Commander Thompson ordered the ship's engines start to generate black smoke, a visual beacon rising hundreds of feet into the sky. Itasca's radio room became the center of frantic activity. Operators tried different frequencies, some sent voice messages, others Morse code, all hoping to penetrate a mysterious barrier, preventing Earhart from receiving their signals. On the Electra's flight deck, the situation was deteriorating. Flying at 1,000 feet reduced fuel consumption but created new problems. Low-altitude flight over water is physically and mentally exhausting. Without a visible horizon in the early morning light, maintaining straight and level flight becomes challenging. The pilot must constantly fight the disorientation that comes from staring at a blank blue ocean. At 7:58 a.m., Earhart's frustration was evident. "We are circling but cannot see the island, cannot hear you." She requested the Itasca transmit on 7,500 kilocycles, not realizing the ship could only send Morse code, not voice on that frequency. Code that neither she nor Noonan were very good at reading. The communication gap grew wider at 8 a.m. when Earhart requested the Itasca determine her position and respond by voice on 3105 kilocycles. The ship's radio direction finder couldn't operate on Earhart's frequency, making her request impossible to fulfill. As the morning progressed, scattered clouds cast moving shadows on the water below, confusing Earhart and working against her attempts to see the island. The rising sun created glare that may have obscured the small island on the eastern horizon. Each passing minute consumed precious fuel from the Electra's tanks. The situation has now become critical. By 8:30 a.m., recognizing the increasing chance of an emergency, Commander Thompson ordered the recall of the landing crew that were on Howland Island, preparing for Earhart's arrival. The Itasca may soon need to start search operations. At 8:43 a.m., Earhart's voice came through Itasca's radio room. "We are on the line 157337. We'll repeat this message. We'll repeat this on 6210. Stand by." Those words contained crucial information. The line 157337 referred to a navigational line running through Howland Island. By announcing they were following this line, Earhart indicated they had reached the correct longitude, but were uncertain about their latitude. They could be anywhere along that line, north or south of Howland. This was the last transmission from the Electra, the last words Earhart was heard saying. The transmission she promised to repeat never came. For the next hour, the Itasca broadcasted continuously, switching between frequencies and transmission methods. Radio operators called until their voices grew hoarse. They received nothing but dead silence. 10 o'clock came and went. This was the time when Earhart's fuel supply would be exhausted. Each minute passing meant bad news. Every eye aboard the Itasca remained fixed on the horizon, searching for any sign of an aircraft in distress. What happened in those final minutes aboard the Electra can only be imagined. Somewhere over the Pacific, the fuel supply reached its limit. The engines that had carried Earhart and Noonan across thousands of miles of ocean would have sputtered and gone silent. In the sudden quiet, with only the sound of wind passing over the aircraft's frame, they would have begun the final descent toward the water. But the Electra wasn't designed for water landings. Its low wings meant it would immediately flip once it contacted the water. By 10:40 a.m., with no sign of the aircraft and no further radio contact, Commander Thompson ordered the search. The Itasca started a search pattern north and west of Howland Island, where Earhart was most likely to have gone down. As the Itasca moved away from Howland Island, the first phase of the Earhart saga, her actual flight, had ended. What began now was a search that expanded to include many ships, dozens of aircraft, and thousands of people scouring 250,000 square miles of ocean. Somewhere in that endless blue space, the world's most famous female pilot and her navigator disappeared. The last voice transmission at 8:43 a.m. was the dividing line between Amelia Earhart as a living person, making history, and Amelia Earhart as one of history's enduring mysteries. The disappearance of Amelia Earhart sparked the most extensive search operation in naval history to that date. Within hours, President Roosevelt personally authorized the deployment of the USS Colorado from Hawaii with its 3 seaplanes. The aircraft carrier USS Lexington followed with 62 aircraft aboard. Altogether, 9 ships, 66 aircraft, and over 4,000 personnel participated in the search for Amelia. For 16 days, search planes crisscrossed the ocean surrounding Howland Island in an ever-expanding grid. Navy pilots flew punishingly low, often just 100 feet above the waves, straining to spot any sign of wreckage, a life raft, survivors, or bodies. The search eventually covered more than 250,000 square miles of ocean, an area roughly the size of Texas. They found nothing. Not a single confirmed piece of the aircraft, no oil slick, no debris, just empty ocean stretching to the horizon in every direction. On July 18, 1937, the Navy terminated the search. In his official report, Rear Admiral Orrin G. Murfin wrote, "It is regrettably unreasonable to conclude, other than that the unfortunate flyers were not above water upon conclusion of the search." George Putnam, Earhart's husband, refused to accept this conclusion. He financed his own search vessels until October 1937, when financial limitations finally forced him to abandon the effort. On January 5, 1939, Amelia Earhart was legally declared dead in a Los Angeles courtroom. The official crash and sink theory remains the most widely accepted explanation of Earhart's disappearance. But what if Earhart and Noonan managed to land on a reef at another uninhabited island and lived as castaways for a while? What if they managed to land on the Marshall Islands and were captured by Japanese forces dying in captivity? We may never know. I am Eleanor Graves, and this was Fobia.
The story ends here. Don't expect answers. We return next week.